Oh, back for another story, I see. Wanting perhaps adventure, danger, excitement. Well, don't you worry, my boy. Or my girl. I assure you, you will find it here. And I believe I have just the story to fill that wandering mind of yours with dreams of adventure. So let us begin. Unbeknown to most, the world does not stand alone. There are countless realms that border our own. Realms which put the rules of what we believe to be reality in great contestation. And we enter now the realm of demons, a realm inhabited and ruled over by both demons and monsters alike. Things that you hear about in your storybooks that are passed down in legend. Here they are all very, very real. Vampires and werewolves rule kingdoms, fight over territory, struggle for dominance in societies, worlds, and structures, much like our own. But there is one segment of land, one of the largest in the entire demon world, in fact covering a large segment of the available land, and yet no one dares step upon it with any intent to claim it as their own. They do not build towns or cities. There are no structures made by the hands of demon, man, or monster. No temples or castles. It is simply an endless array of natural things. Lakes and rivers, forests and ocean, and the tallest mountain that exists within the demon world. But why? Why in the great expanse of all the things in the demon world does no one dare step foot here with any intent to conquer or claim? It is because this territory is already claimed by one of the most frightful entities in all of the demon world. High atop the tallest mountain of the demon world, one of the most powerful entities that exists within it calls the tip of that mountain its home, claiming not only the mountain itself, but all of the surrounding territory. And no one is foolhardy enough to challenge it. This is the kingdom of the Armored King, the most powerful dragon who rules over this segment of land. His power without question. Even other dragons fear him. He has become a symbol of indestructibility and almighty force and power within the demon world. He rules over his kingdom the same way a lion rules over the savannah, without question or contestation. His kingdom is a natural one. You are either predator or prey, a food chain with him at the very top, both figuratively and very literally. Those that inhabit these lands live in primitive state, every moment spent either hunting or ensuring that you're not hunted. Here, some of the mightiest beings that exist within the demon world vie for control and power within the territory of the Armored King, whose shadow looms great over these lands. It was in fact a joyous day when the Armored King finally chose a wife, a mate, for which there was a grand gathering to anoint the new queen, a grand white spiritous dragon, said to be the most beautiful of all of the dragons, and possessing great power. It of course did not rival that of the Armored King himself, but only a fool would dare challenge her. Soon after, their partnership was made a spectacle for all the beings that dwell within the Armored King's territory. Another spectacle was created to anoint the firstborn of the Armored King's offspring. All within the Armored King's territory gathered to watch the hatching of the Queen's first egg. From it crawled a tiny little dragon, a little hatchling which they named Zira. Here within the territory of the Armored King, Zira was to be princess, and of course, great things were expected of her, as all around knew that one day Zira would stalk these skies, just as her mother and father did before her, that as small as she might be now, all would one day come to fear her might. It is there, atop the tallest mountain in the demon world, that our story begins, in the dwelling of the Armored King, where he, his wife, and their child call home, and where the Armored King and his wife sleep, about to be rudely awakened, as the Armored King's wife, Verica, is awoken from her slumber by a somewhat itchy sensation and some slight jerking, as she feels something dangling from one of her horns. Opening her eyes to see her young hatchling, gnawing on her horn, bouncing up and down, hanging only from her teeth, while the rest of her body swung about wildly.
"Wake up! Wake up!"
Zira announced, as she swung back and forth from the horn. What is it, Zira?" her mother exclaimed, as she began to rise, yawning as the morning greeted her.
"We're supposed to go hunting. You promised I could come,"
Zira said, as she finally released the horn in her jaws, dropping to the ground, with a bit of a thud falling onto her back, before rolling over to her claws and beginning to skitter around.
"Come on!"
Yes, dear. I suppose I did give you my word. I don't suppose you want to come," she said, looking over to her husband, the Armored King, a rest beside her. "I have had my fill. Besides, I took her on her last excursion. It's your turn," he said, grumbling as he rolled his head over. "I suppose," she said as she got up, beginning to stretch off. The almost crystal-like shimmer that coated her scales as she stretched off, her tail whipping about, spreading her wings, stretching them wide as they too shimmered, small sparkles of rough material that removed themselves as her scales rubbed together, and she shook off the excess, which usually tended to coat the floor of their cavern, making it too shimmer and sparkle. "Okay, hunting we must go."
"All right,"
Zira shouted, jumping up and down. "Hunting, hunting, we're going hunting."
"The hunt. The quarry for dangerous prey,"
Zira said, bouncing about, taking stalking patterns, crouching low before pouncing.
"I'm gonna catch something big. Maybe Korith. Korith are big,"
Zira said, as her mother laughed. "Perhaps you should set your sights on something a bit smaller, my dear. You are still quite young."
"Oh, but I like Korith. They taste all mushy. Lots of meat."
"Yes, of course, sweetheart. But we can't always have Korith. Remember, there's a balance out there. If we eat them all, then there won't be any left."
I know,"
Zira replied to her mother. "So, come along," her mother said as she reached down with her mouth, opening it wide.
"No, I don't want to be carried. I can fly."
"Yes, dear, I know. But you're not going anywhere on your own, and you tend to wander. So, in you go." Zira said with a grumble as she begrudgingly crawled into her mother's mouth, and the jaws closed down over her, leaving small gaps so that Zira could see out from the inside. And her mother exited the cave, extending her wings and taking flight into the area surrounding their home, her gaze out upon the landscape in search of prey. Eventually, Zira's mother found herself flying towards the outermost perimeter of the Armored King's territory. There, the weakest of the beings that inhabited that territory lived, and she could no doubt find something on her daughter's level to help teach her to hunt. As she gazed out from her mother's jaws, and her mother began to shimmer in the light, all sight of her seeming to vanish as her form became unseeable, invisible in every sense of the word, even the beatings of her wings, massive though they be, falling silent. This isn't very important. Listen closely, Zira. When stalking your prey, it's important that they don't know you're coming. You must be silent. I am uncertain of whether you will inherit my ability to become invisible. If you lack this ability, then you will most likely need to get some training from your father in how to stalk effectively. It's a bit easier for me, but I can at least tell you how to move silently, to not allow your footprints to be heard. It's very important.
Why is it important? I mean, can't we just rush up and breathe fire on them? Take a bite. That'll make them go down,
Zira said from in between her mother's teeth. No. Remember, we may be mighty, but that is no reason to be cruel. We simply wish to kill the beast so we can eat it. If it knows we're coming, then obviously it's going to try to run, or possibly even fight back, which will undoubtedly cause it undue pain and suffering. We will most likely have to injure it much more than we would otherwise, before being able to deal a killing blow. If you take them by surprise, then you can kill them in a single stroke.
But what about, excitement and challenge?
Zira said. Oh, I'm sure you'll get plenty of that, sweetheart. However, that will most likely come from other dragons. There are very few beings that are our equal. Now, let's see if we can find something to eat, her mother said, swooping about the skyline silently, as suddenly they began to hear a great deal of ruckus. Normally, the creatures within their territory, even on the borders, remained very silent. As was expected, this was a land of hunt or be hunted, and yet there seemed to be a great number of things within a small cluster, moving through a segment of the forest. She could see light from fire, hear shouts. Something was moving quickly, loudly, and did not care if it was heard. Zira, something's going on.
What?
Her daughter exclaimed from inside her jaw. There's no time to explain, sweetheart. Mommy's going to have to ask you to cling to her back. She's going to need her jaws.
Yes, Mom,
Zira said, as her mother arched her head back, turning it around and releasing her daughter onto her back, who quickly furled her wings in, trying to stay tight to her mother, grasping onto her scales with her teeth and claws to stay as firm to it as possible, as her mother swooped down into the forest below quietly, landing with but a small rumble as she began to quickly stalk through the forest towards the source of the noise. After stalking for a short time, she soon enough found troops of soldiers marching through the lands of the Iron King, a few dozen of them, yelling and shouting, "Find her! No one gets free. They'll have our heads if we don't bring her back. She's valuable stock. You have any idea how few of them there are left pure breeds here in the demon world? If we don't bring her back, he'll have all of our heads lying in pikes," the men announced as they marched through the forest loudly, chopping down ambient shrubs and bushes in their way. These men were clearly from outside of the territory, venturing in search of something. However, they were unwelcome visitors. This territory, that of the Armored King, has always been off limits, and anyone who steps foot within it must abide by the rule of the land, so saith the Armored King, meaning that if you cannot be predator, then regardless of your status in the outside world, you are but prey. This seems perfect, she said as she watched the stumbling groups of soldiers. Zira, this is a perfect opportunity for you. It's time to practice hunting.
Really, Mom?
Zira whispered from atop her mother's back. Yes, dear. Remember what I told you. Move quietly. If you cannot turn invisible, then do your best not to be seen.
All right,
Zira said, hopping down from her mother's back, a little more loudly than she really should, but she was still young. All right, you go left, I go right, Zira's mother said with a smile as they began to part. Zira's mother kept a close eye on her as they encircled the party. Zira's natural hunting instincts were quite sharp, beginning to move from the back of the group, approaching the soldier farthest away from his friends. It was a quick rush of movement as that last soldier in line quickly disappeared, without much sound at all, as Zira crushed his skull in her grasp, disappearing into the bushes and trees that filled the area, as the few soldiers in front of him saw only a blur of motion, a large creature, more than 4 times their size, sweep through, thick silvery scales, long-bladed serrated spikes. As they looked back, what in the hell was that? There's something out here!
Of course there's something out here, you morons! Don't you know where we are? This place is filled with fucking beasts.
No, I'm telling you there's something big out there. We just lost one.
What? Well, where is he?
We don't know. Whatever it was, it just took off with him. It was at that point they heard a scream towards the front of the group.
Ah!
Voices announced as several of the men rushed back towards the rest of the group.
Holy crap! Holy crap!
They cried out.
What? What is it?
The men standing still called, wondering what they were screaming about. I think there's a dragon. A dragon you can't see. We were looking for, and all of a sudden, it was as if something just snapped half of Freddy. Just like that. The upper half of his body was gone. As the blood splattered, we could see a shape and a big eye, shimmering blue and purple, slit like a snake's, gazing at us. It was massive. Holy crap. It's there's no time. We can't collect her. We have to get out of here, now.
But what about the boss?
To hell with him. That wench ain't worth dying for. Don't you know what that is out there? It's the bride of the Iron King, the Armored King's wife himself. She can turn invisible. She's a master predator. Quite frankly, even if we turn around right now, I still don't like our chances of getting out of here alive. But it's a hell of a lot better than if we're stupid enough to keep pressing in. Let's go, now, he said, as they all began to run back towards the edge of the forest, hoping to make it before all of them disappeared. As they rushed through the thick bush and shrubbery, the trees that made passage in this land very difficult, the one in the front of the group quickly found himself bumping into something, falling backwards for a moment as there was a shimmer on the location of his impact, the rest of the group pulling to a halt as he and the rest of them stared up, watching a pair of blue and purple shimmering eyes begin to rise up above their heads, dwarfing over them, bending the tree line around as it moved towards them, as in a mix of sparkly shimmers, pulsating waves, what could not be seen before began to become very visible. A massive, shimmering white dragon, covered in beautiful, sparkly scales, and with a mouth filled with razor-sharp teeth, growling down at them with an intensity that seemed to vibrate the air, waves of heat rolling out of her jaws.
No, we're leaving. We swear we're leaving,
the man on the ground said as he skittered back, crab walking back towards the rest of the group in a complete panic, as one of the men attempted to run the opposite direction, barreling off as quickly as he could, only to find a large creature dropping down on him from a large tree, screaming loudly as it broke his bones until his screams were silenced with a quick bite to the head, as the others began to look back and see a very small dragon that, in comparison to their size, looked like an elephant, a predatory one, growling out at them, digging its claws into the ground.
Oh no, this isn't happening,
they called out, as suddenly they were assailed from both sides. Both Zira and her mother made quick work of the group, getting their fill, or at least as much as they could, of what was here, though Zira's mother still needed plenty to eat. Zira herself got her fill.
That was fun,
Zira exclaimed. Yes, dear. I hope it was. And I don't think they're going to be sending anyone into our territories again anytime soon, they said amongst each other as they began to hear a sound in the distance, a loud calling that echoed into the woods.
What was that?
Zira said, beginning to look in that direction, as her and her mother began to stalk that way, making their way to the forest, closer and closer to the sound. Most predators had probably overheard their conflict and gone far away as to not become next on the menu. But this sound did not seem to be moving. Still, loudly these cries rang out, as Zira and her mother finally found the source of the noise. It was a woman, humanoid in shape. There in the forest, pressed against a tree, she seemed to be covered in blood. There in her grasp, she held a child, a baby, freshly born by the look of it, as the woman did not seem to be doing well, her breath shallow and weak, as the child cried in her arms. As Zira and her mother closed into line of sight with the woman, slumped beneath the tree, her eyes drifted to them, and a look of sadness came over her face.
No,
she called out, gently, under her breath, tear beginning to stream down her face.
Please, no,
she said as her breath began to grow weaker and weaker with every passing moment. Zira's mother's senses were very honed. She could in fact hear the woman's heart slowing. By her closest estimation, it would soon stop beating altogether. It was her last flurry of life, and there from within her grasp, the source of the noise that called them, the cries of the infant. As, in her last moments, the woman cradled it tightly to her body.
Please, don't hurt him,
her last words were, as finally her breath ceased, fell silent, as the last few beats of her heart sung their final tune.
So, do we eat them? Were they sick or something? I don't want to eat them if they were sick.
No, Zira. I believe that this one died as a result of childbirth under extremely stressful circumstance. She was not able to bear the burden. And if my nose is serving me correctly, I think she's a human.
A human? Zero replied. What kind of a demon is that?
It's not a kind of demon, sweetheart. Humans are beings that are exceptionally rare here in the demon world. In the outer kingdoms, it's almost unheard of to see one. Mostly, if you do see anything of humans, they're just half-breeds, usually kept as slaves. But by my nose, I think this one is pure blood, 100% human, she said, giving a sniff, as is her offspring. If my knowledge serves me correct, this would have made her very valuable, a commodity.
So, do we eat her? Do humans taste good?
Zira said, cocking her head as she looked towards her mother. No, dear. I do not think we should eat her. It's such a sad thing, really. Without her, this child will no doubt perish, Zira's mother said as she peered down at the small infant, still alive within her grasp. It's such a shame. They have no respect for life in the outside world. Things are not allowed to grow and flourish as they should. Everything must be cut, carved, and forged, made different than it is intended to be. Life cannot simply exist. Even in our kingdom, even the most meager of creatures are allowed their right to life, existing within the cycle of prey and predator. But this one, as you can see from the chains on her arms and legs, most likely never knew such a thing as freedom.
So, it's just gonna die?
Zira said, staring at the small infant, closing in and giving it a sniff. Well, without somebody to take care of it. Most likely, sweetheart.
But that's not fair.
Well, sometimes life isn't fair, Zira's mother replied, as she grew close, trying to look at the infant in her arms. I'm just too big like this. Well, I might as well, she said, as a bright light began to emit from her form, as suddenly her massive, overwhelming size and stature began to dwindle into a shimmer of sparkles, dissipating down to a form much like the one slumped against the tree, with low-hanging, shimmering long hair, arms and legs, a face and eyes, not much different than that of a human, aside from their strange, otherworldly sort of beauty, as she approached, lifting the infant from the woman's arms. Now, let's get a look at this one, she said, looking the child over. Well, he looks rather healthy. If he were cared for, I surmise that he would live a long enough life. At least for a human, she said, twiddling her finger about, rubbing the small creature's cheek a bit, as small little fingers curled out from the wrapping around it, reaching up and grasping hers, as its cries suddenly fell silent. As her eyes gazed down on it, it smiled up in her direction, even giggled a bit. Oh, do you like me, little one? She exclaimed, smiling back down towards the child.
Oh, Mom, I didn't know you could change like that. You're all tiny now. Even I'm bigger than you.
Yes, Zira. You one day too will learn to shift if needed. Such should be within your range of powers. However, this state isn't exactly comfortable. Feel so confined in it. But this one seems to like it.
Ooh, I got an idea,
Zira shouted, beginning to jump back and forth.
Can we keep it?
What? Zira's mother replied, looking at her curiously.
Can we keep it as like a pet? I promise I'll take care of it.
We cannot keep it.
Oh, why not? Please,
Zira said, beginning to nuzzle her mother.
Please.
You know, if we do, I'm going to be the one who has to take care of it. It's not as if you can nurse a child. And these humans, they're so fragile. You're likely to break it.
I promise I won't. I promise.
Fine, Zira. We can keep it. But it's your responsibility. I will nurse and care for the child until it's old enough that you can take responsibility for it.
Yay!
Zira said, jumping and shouting, twirling about, fluttering her wings.
Ooh, can I name it? Can I name it?
Yes, well, I suppose. What do you think a fitting name would be?
Let me think,
Zira said, beginning to ponder, moving her head about strangely.
How about Jozal? That sounds good, doesn't it?
Jozal, huh? Very well. Jozal it will be, her mother exclaimed, as she ran her finger across its small head, gently as it giggled a bit. Your father is going to be very upset about this, but I suppose that I can deal with it. Come along, I'll need to stay in this form whilst I carry the child. So you're going to need to fly us home. Remember, we're going straight home.
Yeah, I know, Mom, I know,
Zira replied, smiling brightly, her rows of razor-sharp teeth on full display as she had collected her first pet. This story belongs to that child and the somewhat amazing things that transpire within its life.